Bible clearly says that there are good works in store for Christians designed from the foundation of the world so that we would walk in them. This should lead into a proper Christian culture at the individual level, but also, some would say, at the congregational level and wherever Christians are gathered. The question is, if these are things that are supposed to permeate the Christian existence and collectively, not only individually, but collectively, why is it that that is not more visible in modern Christians? We're going to answer that question because it has massive implications for the way that Christianity is understood and how we deploy it. I hope you'll stick with us for the entire episode because I believe it will be a lively discussion on the matter, especially in the compare and contrast version of today's edition of Irrespective. Welcome each and every one of you to this new episode. For those of you that might be joining us for the first time, my name is Gio. My co-host, I'm his co-host, Jesus.
Good morning, friends. I believe, along with Gio, that this is going to be very informative. And if I can start out with just a little observation here, Gio. In Ephesians 2:10, it talks about God preparing these good works. Why am I mentioning this? Well, the world has a way, Satan has a way of imitating, falsifying what God does or wants us to do. Excuse me. And he could get you involved, talking about Satan through the world, in things that don't really come forth from God and still have you believe that you are involved, you are now involved in these works that God prepared beforehand. Yep. It's important to pay attention. You could waste a lot of years of your life by thinking you have embraced these works that God prepared beforehand, when in reality you're far from them.
There's a couple of things that I think we need to clarify from the onset because they've unfortunately been ignored by many churches. And by many churches, I mean, I'm not just talking about the mega churches, which, as we have demonstrated in the past, it's illusory to think that mega churches are the norm. They're not. They're a very small percentage of Christianity, at least in the West. The vast majority of churches, statistically speaking, are about 300 congregants or less. But even then, unfortunately, the optics being what they are, many churches end up following the mega church model. They implement that at the local level, and that includes the messaging that emanates from pulpits. Why do I say this? Because when we talk about culture, Christians have a tendency to talk about culture as something that's distant, something that happens only in the secular sphere. But speaking biblically, the fact of the matter is that these good works that are mentioned in Ephesians 2:10, and we'll read the entire text shortly, actually leads into the germination and maintenance of a culture that should be found within individual Christians and also within the church. The problem is that since Christians have not been educated on this for some time now, they think that it's only something that happens in the secular sphere, when in fact the church, as it were, the body of Christ more specifically, has a culture all its own, dictated and informed by the commandments of Christ and these good works that we'll talk about shortly.
I'll go back to what I stated previously. If you're not paying attention, if you don't become familiar with your Bible, you can get someone like Rick Warren leading you to believe that you can actually fellowship with Muslims. I understand I have to work with them. Some of them might be my neighbors. Some of their kids might be in the school where I send my kids, etc. But fellowship, that's a whole different thing. Yeah. Because when you look at cultures, do you want to live in a place like Iran, or would you prefer to live in an early version of America? I'll go for the latter. And so I think as we settle down and pay attention to the topic, we'll understand what true Christian culture is all about. And maybe just perhaps we'll become inspired enough, not by us, but by the Word of God, to see how much of that we can bring back to society. And if not to society, at least start with our own families.
Well, it's interesting that you're mentioning this now that we're already getting into the specifics of this. Christ, he does a public prayer. Sure, he is talking to the Father. John 7 comes to mind. John 17 is another one that comes to mind. But there's instruction to be had in the way that he's publicly praying to the Father. And one of the things that he says, and I'm going to paraphrase to the Father, is as follows: Lord, I ask you that you were to keep them from the world, but not to take them out of the very same. Paul picks up on this theme and he says, yes, if we were to separate ourselves in a sense, then it means complete isolation. To your point, that's not what the Bible tells us. We're supposed to be salt and light in the world where we are supposed to shine that light, be that seasoning, so to speak, but being in the world while we're operating in that fashion. The problem is that for some time now, Christianity has been unwittingly or wittingly, depends on the person you're talking about here, because there are infiltrators within the church that have actually done the opposite. They have actually made the salt insipid. They have turned off the light of Christians by preaching a gospel that doesn't center at all on the good works, which includes many things, and we'll define that shortly, because unfortunately, many Christians have taken the definition of good works to what many churches have reduced it to. They call it missions as a broad term, and evangelism, and that's the end of that, thereby stunting the good works that actually lead to the growth and Christian culture, which we'll talk about more shortly, as long as we engage in those things. In other words, there's much, it's much more broad than this narrowness that many churches have actually defined these good works and Christian culture to mere, if you leave your tithe here and you go to Venezuela for a week and you pass out the pamphlets and whatnot, that is the extent of good works. And that narrowness is actually nowhere to be found in the Bible, and actually leads to a stunting of Christian growth if we are to narrow out, hollow out that definition.
It's not a pre-packaged group of things that we do, because as necessity arrives on the scene, as opportunities arrive on the scene, we can bring forth Christ as he lives in us and shines through us. Jesus described earth as a dark, dark place. And then he goes on to teach us that our works, and it's interesting when you get the opportunity, friends, take a read on Matthew 5, 15, and 16. He talks about your works, your works, your works, which begs the question, is it our light or is it God's light? I believe it's the latter. It's God's light. It's God's light, but it's shining through us, and he would have us own it to the point of responsibility. So if the world is in a dark place, and all of a sudden through good works, which Christ makes synonymous with light, if through good works, people that are in darkness, because if the world is a dark place and people that abide in it therefore are in darkness see light, then they will be attracted to it. It's like the first time as a child you see a firefly and you go, what is that? And you want to get a feel of them and put them in a bottle, etc. So if the world is a dark place, and I believe it's darker than it's ever been, because there's so much maliciousness and just people bent on hurting other people and gaining space for themselves, to the point of if they hurt 1, 2, 5, 10, they don't care. So if the world is a dark place and all of a sudden through good works they see the light of God, I think this is a great thing and something that we must improve, something that we must work at. Otherwise, to your point, it's not really evangelism that we are carrying forth or taking out. People must see the light and desire it. They once they see something good, and this is what I believe light means, better mind frame, better spiritual frame, whichever way you think you have to look at this.
Or even
look
behavior.
at it. Yes, comportment, absolutely, but it affects your spiritual walk, your mental walk, your emotional walk. So once this light of Christ is working in you and moving through you, people will see this, and hopefully they will desire it, and that's your opportunity to share that. And as that group of people embracing this grows, society is impacted.
There's an interesting dichotomy that you just mentioned, which is an essential part of our presentation this morning. You just talked about how there's a lot of darkness in secular culture, and that the salt and light, being us believers, are supposed to speak into that darkness. I use the term speak, but of course,
we have to throw
understands
into that
metaphor.
Isaiah said it will be called light. The darkness will be
Correct.
called light, and the things that are true light will be called darkness.
Glad you mentioned it, because that was, you build the bridge for me. A lot of Christians will call secular culture and the maliciousness within a culture, but definitionally, and we'll read it shortly, culture actually talks about growth. It actually talks about cultivation of things that lead to growth. So even then, there's a misnomer, there's been a misapplication of what culture actually is. So Gio, some might ask, what you're saying is that anything that brings down what proper culture is supposed to grow and germinate is not a culture. Exactly, because it's destructive. Think about it. Christian culture is supposed to lead to a germination of growth. Colossians, I'll read that shortly. As a matter of fact, let's read the text because it'll make the point. Ephesians 2:10. For we are his workmanship. The word already speaks a lot to us. Workmanship. Obviously, God is building something. God is working something. He's trying to construct something. Peter uses this sort of language, the building language, talking about the temple. I know he's writing to Jews, but he's trying to appeal, as it were, to their culture, as it were, to understand a spiritual reality. He is the chief cornerstone of the building. We build ourselves on top of him. Ephesians 2:10, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. But what are those good works? As we said earlier, those good works lead to the proper culture. The problem is that that culture has been hollowed out by years of pulpiteering that says, just be like the world. Ingratiate yourself with the world. But if we're going to be like the thing that we're supposed to be, salt and light, how then is that going to build us? This is why we have a wreckage of Christians that have not properly built themselves up based on Christ's commandments, on the Bible, but on secularism that has been Christianized, which, if you heard my language, it's an irony because it doesn't exist. It's a contradiction, but that's the presentation that we've been given for years. Created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Listen to this definition from Webster, the 1828, his dictionary, culture. There's a couple of different things because Webster applies it not only to agriculture, but also to personal building and societal building. Number one, the act of tilling and preparing the earth for crops. There's the agricultural bent to it. Cultivation, the application of labor or other means of improvement. Now notice how he shifts and he says, but this can also be applied with respect to, as you were talking about, thought, behavior, etc. The application of labor or other means to improve good qualities in or growth as the culture of the mind, the culture of virtue. So those things have to be built up. They have to be cultivated. But if there is no solid ground, if there is no foundation to build up on, then what you essentially have is destruction, not a proper culture.
So just in case time does this thing to us, which happens to be treason.
It always betrays.
Yes. Let's talk about something that we should be building up, we should be manifesting, and that it's almost gone in many places. Let's talk about common courtesy. It used to be that you went by your neighbor's house or they went by your house and you would say, good morning, common courtesy, or you would hold the door open for somebody and they would say, thank you.
Part of a Christian culture that inspired that.
Absolutely.
Right. So, I'm sorry to interrupt because it goes back to your earlier point, Christianity informing, as it were, the secular culture, being salt and light.
And again, this is taking it to the very basics. We're talking about courtesy then. I remember talking to a brother in Christ, and I was talking to him about my experience in Miami, Florida, and my experience in New York City as it pertains to courtesy. And I said, it's mind-blowing that you can hold the door open for a police officer and he goes right by you without saying thank you, like you did nothing for him. You don't deserve a thank you. And he said, this brother in Christ said, then don't hold the door open for the police officer. And then I immediately said, so what you're saying is to avoid my responsibility, which is to be the light of the world, salt of the earth. No, that's not what I meant. I said, maybe you misconstrued the reason why I'm talking to you about it. I'm talking to you about it not because I'm complaining that it's there. I'm just letting you know, I'm informing you that the problem is there. It's there big time. In the words of Trump, it's big time.
Big time.
And there's something that we can do about it. What can we do about it? Continue to say good morning. Continue to hold the door open. And then if 5 young kids go through, stop them and say, hey, say thank you.
Right.
Maybe it'll shock them.
Sure.
Maybe they'll go through your genealogy, but at least you're doing your part in trying to rescue this or bring it back. And now, again, I'm going to the very, very simplest examples because, once again, time could hit us in the face, and next thing you know, some of you are asking, how do we do this? Give us some examples.
Yes, and we'll give those shortly, but you just gave one. Just, things that may seem insignificant to you, because now what comes to my mind when you're talking to this fellow that's having that interaction with you is, notice that Christians have been desensitized to these things that have reverberations, that if we don't actually walk in those good works, then eventually we just become a amalgamated, I guess would be the term, into the secular culture. Again, we've
The
criticized that
solution was
phrase,
no
but-
solution. It was
Right.
actually let the erosion that has taken place in
Right.
them take place in you also. No.
Now, I know what some people are thinking because I mentioned earlier, Gio, you seem to have this hostility, some will say, against missions and evangelism because Jesus says, the Great Commission, remember, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Let me be more specific for the audience to know what my personal view on this is, which I believe is inspired by what the text tells us. Go into all the world and preach the gospel doesn't mean that you ignore everything that good works encapsulates. I'll repeat that again. Evangelizing doesn't mean ignoring the entirety of what good works actually means. But I thought that the extent, and that's a key word, the extent of good works is doing good unto sinners. Sermon on the Mount, that sort of thing. If they take away my tunic, I'm supposed to give them my cowl. Also, if someone slaps me in the face, I'm supposed to say, here's my other cheek. That's what I thought good works are. If you have that definition of good works in your mind, you are victim. Congratulations, you are victim to the narrowing, the hollowing out, like I said earlier, of what good works necessarily means. One of the things that we have criticized throughout the years, and people have gotten angry at us for it, but we are just following what the text tells us, is that why is it that Christians have a tendency in practice to undermine, for example, the good works of being proper parents, to undermine the good works of being proper employees, proper businessmen? Those are all part and parcel of doing good works. Well, some might say, I don't see it that way because making money is just making money. You're telling me that providing for those of your household is not a good work? You see, that in and of itself tells you how flaccid Christianity has become. And it proves the earlier point that pulpits have been saying for years to Christians that good works are narrowed out. They're hollowed out to just these two things definitionally, but then at the expense of other things that God, that Christ would have us do to actually build a culture. Where else, for example, are you going to build a proper Christian culture first and foremost if it isn't the household?
But
Just as an
perhaps,
example.
just perhaps, people have their value system messed up. Who messed it up? Take a guess. To the point that they'll go, mom and dad are going to take on not just one job, maybe two, so we can have any and all things, and we shall leave the child rearing to the nannies or the school system. And then you bring up something like you're bringing up now, and I think subconsciously they get angry at you because back then, somewhere back then, they should have said, we'll have a little less, but we'll own up to our responsibility as parents a little more so that we can get the proper results in our kids. So the value system said, let's opt for 4 televisions, 3 cars, and the rest of the things. And in the meantime, you were not able to shape your kids the way you wanted to,
Right.
because you yourself were sold a bill of goods saying this is what you should be embracing.
Right.
And so having a proper value system will help you develop the Christian culture within yourself, in your family, in your household, so that even if you have a little less, even if you get less of the so-called American dream, you will, on the other side of a little sacrifice and some abnegation, you will see the results. And then God on top of that will add the things that you sacrificed a while for, because you, first of all, get the great fruit of not having problematic childs that bring about so many issues, and they're costly, by the way. So even as you think you're just saving money and making more money, some of the issues that kids can bring into your life are very costly, not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually. So having the right value system at the right time, implemented properly, not only gets you the right results in the things that are important, but after that, you get the things that God has promised to add on, because you're actually seeking his kingdom and his righteousness.
You're already beginning to hit on what the solution for this is, folks. First and foremost, you have to understand that the messaging that has been sent your way about what good works actually are and how that feeds into Christian culture have been erroneous. So you have to wipe the slate clean, in a sense. How do I do that? Let me lead you to a text here, which gives you a proper understanding of how we ought to see these things in a Christian fashion. Colossians 1, I'm reading this earlier in the week and it popped out because it's part of what we are trying to explain to the audience here. Verse 9. For this reason, we also, since the day we heard it, do not cease to pray for you and to ask. You see, already from there, you begin to see how Paul is engaging in good works. He's keeping in mind and he's praying for those that he ministers over. That's a good work, folks. He continues. And to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding. But for what? According to modern Christianity, that knowledge of his will and wisdom and spiritual understanding means as long as we have inclusion, as long as sinners like us, that necessarily is being salt and light. That's not at all what it means to be salt and light. He continues, that you may walk worthy of the Lord. That is culture building, folks. Christ himself establishes a culture in the hearts and in the minds of his disciples, and his disciples start doing the same thing with their disciples. There's a way that we ought to walk which is worthy of the Lord. That in and of itself, you see, Christ is building up the disciples. The disciples are building up their disciples. The church, what is the purpose of the fivefold ministry?
I'm sorry, because I'm about to explode here. Like is a fleeting feeling.
Right.
If you're going to go for something, go for respect.
Correct. I'm glad you mentioned that. But is it true or not? Paul himself says the fivefold ministry is put in place for what? For the edification.
Yes.
Of the saints. The language is there, and it will teach us something if we're willing to pay attention to it.
And the way that Paul deploys it, it's a centrifugal force. It continues to go on
Correct.
And go on generation after generation.
I'm glad you mentioned this, that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing him, being fruitful in every good work. Every good work. He doesn't limit this as modern Christians have. Missions, evangel. You know how many years we've seen churches do missions, and yet the families, the local households, the local communities are left to rot, spiritually speaking, and that has reverberations, as it were. Think about it. The priorities are wrong. Fully pleasing him, being fruitful in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. So obviously, what we've been fed for many years by many of these people whom are more interested in popularity, money, what have you, is something that actually feeds into concupiscence, what the Bible will call concupiscence. James hits on this. One of the things that he mentions is one of the many things that are erroneous in the Christian mindset is praying for the wrong thing because you let your carnal desires influence, as it were, those prayers. That, in a nutshell, is what Christianity has become.
He says you turn angry because you don't get what you asked for.
But it's become, in a nutshell, what Christianity is.
Absolutely.
So we need to, if you want the solution to this, we need to turn back, as it were, turn away from these erroneous definitions that they've given us of what good works are and actually work on them. Folks, we encourage you to begin seeing things in the smallest, the things that might seem insignificant to you are the things that if you get them right will actually begin to build a proper culture. Let me give you one example. We talked on Wednesday about if you don't have a habit of reading so as to establish the mind to begin to do that. We had a bit of a chuckle because in this generation, if you ask them to read a lot of people to read one paragraph, all of a sudden they think that you've asked them to build the Empire State Building in less than a day. It's kind of ridiculous how mentally we've gotten so weak to that we can't even read an entire article without understanding the keeping, as it were, the thread of what the author is trying to inform us. But if we actually work toward that discipline of building the mind, where now we can keep up an entire argument through 100 pages, 200 pages, 300 pages, that has positive effects for your mind. If you teach your kids to do the same thing, that has positive effects for their mind. If you actually take the time out where now you're not mindlessly consuming entertainment, but instead your mind is active, you're questioning everything that is being fed to yourself and to your family, and you teach your kids the same things, that is a good work. I know it might seem insignificant to some, but these are the things that if we begin to change, if we begin to apply Christian principles to them, they will actually then build a proper culture that individually we will actually prop ourselves up. We will build ourselves up to looking more and more like Christ, which is, at least from what I'm reading in the New Testament, that's the very essence of what New Testament teaching is.
I have been interested in words for a while now. And when I listen to those words, good works, immediately images pop in my mind. You could have something that is, wow, that's good work versus that's sloppy work. And so good works work. But at the end of the day, they are work. And we are a generation that are somewhat accustomed to not working. We get things handed to us in such a way where comfort has become king. Why should I cook? Why should I clean this? Why I can just throw it away, etc. And so if you want something that is going to provide benefits, let's take it back to the family. Marriage could be very beneficial. Two are better than one, absolutely. But if these two don't get along, then you have issues. Your marriage becomes a war, a place of war. What happens once you've damaged part of your marriage? Good works can actually bring healing into that marriage, into that husband and wife relationship. It's like medicine and therapy. You got to stay with it, stay with it, stay with it. When someone's heart is betrayed by some evil work or some indifference, whatever it is, it's going to take good works to repair that, to repair the relationship, but it will happen.
Right.
Now, if you're sloppy about it, if it's sloppy work, then you will find the rest of your life a living hell, a place of war, talking about the marriage, the same with the kids. So when you talk about good works, remember that the word works is important here.
Yep.
You'll have to work at this. You will have to deploy this continuously and make it better with each use.
Right.
It's a work. But if you do work at works, you will see the benefits of good works in your marriage, in your kids, in your personal life, in your health, and so on and so forth, in your neighborhood, in your society, and yes, even in evangelism. There are people that when you listen to them attempting to evangelize, and I'm not damning them, I actually applaud their efforts and push them to continue to do it better. But when you listen to them, you go like, and how long have you been doing this? Because there are proper ways of approaching people and sharing Christ so that people will be more attentive and more open to receiving Christ.
I think for my part, to begin to wrap this up, if you want a simple principle, as it were, by which you can apply this to every extent of your existence to understand that you're engaging in the good works, as Ephesians 2:10 says, that God has designed for us from the foundations of the world, you have to ask yourself the simple question, is this edifying me? Because I get it. Sometimes things, we were having a conversation recently, we both enjoy baseball, have for the longest time. And one of the things that we've noticed in particular with the Moneyball and sabermetrics thing, and there's an analogy here, that it's done is that it's necessarily complicated the game and it's even made it less human, as it were, which takes away from the elegance of the game. We can get into the weeds on that, but one of the things that those things have a tendency to do is to overly complicate what should necessarily, by its very nature, be, as it were, simple mechanics that lead to something that is outright elegant. Well, guess what? If you look at a parallel here, spiritually speaking, one of the tendencies that Christians have had for some time now is to overly complicate their existence with all of these explanations and all of these other things that actually just, yes, you have this head knowledge, but you actually don't deploy it, and it doesn't lead to anything of edification. Ask yourself, whatever I'm doing now, whatever I'm not doing now, is that actually leading to my edification and to the edification of those that are around me? If it's not, then I would encourage you to engage in the practice that will actually lead to beneficial outcomes, again, for your spiritual walk and also for those that are around you. And then you will begin to see that Christian culture building that the good works are supposed to inform and build that culture, starting by yourself, and then also reflecting that to those around you, your family, those in the church, your community, et cetera, et cetera. And that, I hate to use the phrase because it's become a vain thing, but in a Christian context, it makes sense. It has positive reverberations for yourself and those around you.
I'll stick to baseball. You started it. I'll join you in this. Recently had the opportunity to visit a minor league ballpark. The minute you get to the area, the ballpark itself, you can see how clean it is. The field itself, even though it's a minor league ballpark, is manicured. The people that receive you, talking about ticket office and the ushers, they were wiping down the seats because it had rained. I mean, it's absolutely a place that I would go back to over and over again. Now, I've visited a few major league stadiums, whether it's baseball or the NFL or the NBA. And some of the treatment that you get from the city folks that are running these stadiums, you go like, the experience itself of having to come out of here makes me think that I don't want to come back here,
Right.
even though these are the pros. This is la creme de la creme. Whereas I'm going back to this particular ballpark. It's in a small area, more rural, if you will, and it's just run a lot better to the point that I want to go back. Your life should reflect something like this. People should want to come back to fellowship with you, to be your friend, to work with you at whatever level we're talking about the relationships are at. If this is happening, then you know that you're on the right path. Most especially if you let the people know, because you must let them know that these good works that you are involved in and or with are representing Christ.
Right.
Because the target at the end of the day is to bring Christ-like fruit, not only in yourself, but in others. Because some people will say, I'm like a secret agent. I just do the right thing. And then hopefully that leads to what? You're a secret agent.
Right.
So somehow, some way, you must inform people, even if it's in a subtle way, that this is a representation of the character of Christ. This is what they're seeing. This way, God is glorified, because when Jesus talked about let people see your good works, he said, so the Father will be glorified. So inform others as to this is my driving force. This is what's behind me. And if you do see a difference, if you are seeing a difference, my friend, my coworker, it's because it's Christ in me trying to reach you, your mind, your heart, and all the things that he wants to make right in your life. He wants you to see them first in me. That way, you won't be accused of being a hypocrite. I don't see any of these good things in you. Why would you say I need this and that I should want this when your situation is a disaster? Deploy it in your own life, and then maybe just then I'll be interested in it.
I said I was going to say one last thing. I lied.
You had two.
I had two
last things.
last things because you just mentioned something that triggered something in my mind. If you'll notice, the thumbnail that we had placed for this live stream, there's a picture of a modern stage. They don't even call it a pulpit anymore at a church, and the lights and the pyrotechnics and everything, and people are supposedly worshiping God. And on the right side of the thumbnail, you'll notice that there's a family gathered and they're enjoying each other's company. And we asked the question, this or this, because again, the title of the episode is, what are Christian culture and good works really? A lot of people have this tendency, because it just inspired me with what you just said. A lot of people have a tendency to think, I go to church so that that team there were to tell me how I'm supposed to look, how I'm supposed to act. That's actually the erroneous way to think about this. We established a culture in the households, and that culture, which is inspired, as it were, by Christian thinking, ought to be reflected already in the way that we act amongst each other as believers. The
Plus,
order, as it
the
were, has been-
Pentecostals made it all about the way people look. And at the end of the day, what was the biggest or is the biggest complaint against them? It's all superficial.
Yes.
It's all about
Yes.
the inside. So make it about the inside. And I also have a second last thought.
So we have
Perhaps
4
you'll
points.
pick up a third. If you do bring forth your best effort and people still reject you, don't take it personally.
Right.
So what do? You move on.
Correct.
You move on, and don't let that bad experience harm you.
Right.
Expect some people to reject you, even if you are in your best behavior and comportment and you're sharing like never before and your generosity is out there. Some people will reject you. Others, they'll think you're a fool and they'll try and take advantage of you. Be careful with that also. But at the end of the day, remember, not everybody's going to love you and embrace you. Some people will reject you because you know what? They actually love the darkness.
Yes.
So if they don't want the light, that's their problem.
Exactly. Folks, that's all we have for you on this edition. If
You don't have a
watched,
third thing?
No. That's the best way to tie this thing in a nice knot. Folks, we want to thank you if you watched the entire episode. Thank you for sticking around for the entirety. We encourage you, please, we ask you, subscribe if you have not done so, whether on X, whether on YouTube, whether on Rumble. Please also leave a comment and hit the thumbs up. The thumbs up will, as it were, alert the algorithms that there is organic interest in our content, and then they'll begin to suggest it to others. It's one of the best ways to help us share the content. Also, help us share the content. Share the link, repost this so that others may see what we're trying to do here. The content is, again, we're trying to edify people through what we offer here on Irrespective. Slightly also with being the...
That more or less?
Exactly.
Like this more or less?
Correct. And don't
Be
forget...
a good Roman.
Exactly. Be a good Roman. And also, don't forget to donate. It helps us to continue to put out this content for your edification. The
There's
links,
a good work there.
yes, yes, that is a very positive work. It'll help us to continue to put out this content for your edification. The links for everything that we have mentioned are in the description box beneath the video player. Well, that's all we have for this edition. We'll gather again on Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Has this been our good work for the day?
This has been our good work for the day. Even what we did a couple of weeks ago, where we did a new segment called Retard of the Week, that was also a good work for the week.
That was a great work.
That was a great work.
And even if people reject us today, you know what's going to happen? We'll be back at this
Correct.
Wednesday night.
8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the next edition of Irrespective. Until the next occasion that we gather, may the Lord shine his face upon you.